Welcome back everyone to more NASCAR Heat 3 coverage here at Knee Pit Gaming. Today's setup video takes us to the Tricky Triangle at Pocono. We're going to be taking a look at the track itself, talking a little bit about lap times, and of course we'll get into a setup that you can use for all three of the top NASCAR series from Trucks, Xfinity, and Cup. So let's get right to it. All right, now that we're here in the truck, before we get into the setup discussion itself, let's talk a little bit about the three series and the track. We'll talk a little bit about lap times and so on. So I'll start off by telling you that this is the same basic setup I use in all three of the series. We'll talk about a few tweaks here and there that I make for one car over another, but this is basically it. This is a great place to start for me, and then, as I mentioned, we'll talk a little bit about some of the tweaks that I like to make from car to car at this particular track a little bit later on. Now let's talk some about the track itself. This track has three very unique corners. That's what makes it famous, is that each corner is different from the others, and there are only three corners as opposed to the traditional four on an oval. At this track, once you have a car handling really good in one corner, it generally hurts the performance in at least one of the other two corners. So you have to keep that in mind. And in general, the compromise here is going to be in turn one for most people. And the reason I say that is because if you have the car that will rotate very nicely and quickly to get you through turns two and also allow you to be very aggressive in turn three, then it's generally going to be loose going into turn one. So expect that. But there are a few ways that you can try to help out with that, even aside from the setup tweaks that we'll talk about a little bit later on. So there's some things you can do with your driving style. Number one is the easiest. Simply back off the gas a little bit earlier. Maybe a car or a truck width sooner, and that sometimes will be enough to calm the car down and keep it a little bit more stable and keep it underneath you on corner entry. Another option is to drag the brake. It's something you can use the brake bias for and adjust the feeling of the car. Just give it enough brake to calm the car down on corner entry and you should be fine. Another alternative is to simply alter the line that you're running into the corner. I traditionally like to stay out by the fence as long as I can and then arc the car into the corner at the last moment and really try to maintain as much speed as possible. But that can get the car particularly loose on the entry of turn one. So simply drive a little straighter line in here. Maybe don't go in, don't stay on the wall quite as long before you turn into the corner, or maybe get about a car or a truck width off the wall and try that. Those are three very quick options that will allow you to get through turns two and or three a lot better and help you with that compromise in turn one. All right, let's move on and talk a little bit about lap times here. My lap times, basically I stopped trying to get faster here because I was easily outrunning the AI, and then getting any faster was simply decreasing the amount of fun that I had at the track. And I love this track, so I simply stopped trying to get faster. So in the trucks, anywhere in a 52.8 to 52.9 and you will blow away the AI. They qualify, almost a half second slower than that even on the maximum difficulty. So you'll have no trouble outrunning the AI if you are anywhere around a 53 flat or better. Unfortunately, I hate to have to say that, but that's pretty much where the game is right now with the AI. Moving on to Xfinity, it's the same basic situation here. You're going to have no trouble outrunning the AI. My quicker laps are in the 51.5, 51.6 range. But again, you're not going to have to run that quick to be faster than the AI and pull out to some big leads. And then finally in Cup, quicker laps in the 49.8, 49.9 range. But again, you're not going to need to run near that fast to find yourself at the front of the pack, particularly in the race. The Cup cars for the AI are a little bit better here in qualifying, but still, you're going to qualify near the front, if not at the front, and then have great race pace as the AI traditionally slow down after qualifying to race pace, which would be realistic, but given some other things in the game, it's not really the way it always works out. All right, so the setup itself, shock settings, nothing really to talk about here. If you watch my other videos, the 3.5 settings are something that I like to use just sort of standardized. At this point in NASCAR Heat 2, I use 10s all across the board. There are so many different options that will work here. And you don't have to use the same settings in all of the corners. You don't have to use 3.5 in every corner of the car. That is certainly not something that you have to do. It's simply something to keep it simple for me, and then I'll let you guys tune from there to your liking. So you can certainly tune each individual corner. But again, just trying to keep it simple. For the shock settings, I'll let you guys go from there. Weight settings, we want maximum left side weight. And then front weight is a very important setting for me here because I use it for the stabilization of the car. The more front weight that I put in the car will generally tighten up on entry. And this is really where I can help the car to stabilize on corner entry to turn 1. Now it hurts you, as we talked about in the other corners, because it's going to slow down the rotation of the car. But if you need more stability in the car, then one option is to increase the front weight. Then we move on to wedge, which is at 50.5%. And this is something you can play around with in each of the 3 series. As I mentioned, I'm using the same setup in each of the 3 series, or same basic setup with only a few tweaks. And this is one of those easy tweaks. Increasing the wedge number will help to stabilize the car, but it will also slow down the rotation of the car. And that can really help you on corner entry. If you are getting too loose, then increase that wedge number a little bit. Maybe go from 50.5 to 51. See if that helps you out. And then if it doesn't, try to increase it a little bit more. But in a track like this, I like to use a little bit lower wedge number, simply because I like the quicker rotation of the car, because you're on the gas so much and so hard here that I want to make sure that the car doesn't under rotate for me and I can stay in the gas. Then you move on to the spring settings. 1,100 pounds in the left front, 1,200 in the right front. I prefer a stiffer spring set in the front end of the car and a little bit softer on the left front, just to help stabilize the car, because it gets a little bit loose on entry depending on how deep I drive the car into the corner. So a little bit lower left front spring helps out generally to stabilize the car, make it a little bit tighter on corner entry. The rear springs are where you have quite a bit of adjustability here. Just as always when setting up a car, every setting affects everything else. Nothing is on an island, so you can adjust the various settings and they work well with each other. Left rear spring at 400 pounds and the right rear spring at the maximum of 600 pounds. So 200 pounds rear spring split. You can certainly run more than that, and I've tried that and it worked perfectly fine. You can also get by with running less overall rear spring. In fact, that's one of the changes I make when I get into the Cup car, is just to get a little bit more stability in the Cup car. I drop the left rear to 350 pounds and the right rear to 550 pounds. So I take 50 pounds out of both of the rear springs and play around with that number. Maybe take 100 pounds out and see if that helps to stabilize the car. But again, the better rotation I get out of the car, the more speed I can get at this track. Moving on to tire settings, these are pretty basic that I threw in the car and they seem to work okay. So again, I did not continue to work on speed. 27, but anywhere from probably 26 to 28 pounds is perfectly fine on the left sides. And then on the right sides, 30 to about 32, maybe even 33 if you wanted to. And keep in mind, the more difference you put in between the left sides and the right sides, that can really help with the rotation of the car. So if you need the car to rotate a little bit more, then one option is to simply put more stagger in the tires. And the easiest way to do that is by simply increasing the right side pressures. But anywhere similar to what you're seeing on the screen should have the car fairly stable for you. Miscellaneous settings, maximum front camber, because I can't figure out a reason not to use that. It simply works well for me. But if you feel like the car is a little bit too twitchy for you, then lower the camber number some and get that stability in the car if you'd rather do that than say mess with the wedge or the rear springs or anything like that. So keep that in mind. The maximum front camber works great for me here, but it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm recommending it for everyone. The front sway bar is at 1.15 inches, and that is pretty standard for me. It gives me the feel that I'm looking for. The front sway bar will control a lot of the overall rotation of the car, so going up a notch or two on this setting can really help to tighten up a car, particularly on corner entry. So keep that in mind as a possible adjustment. Moving on to the track bar, 11 inches on both sides, and this is something that there is a great degree of variability depending on how you drive the car. If you find that the car is too loose for you, then try dropping the track bar on both sides by an inch, maybe even 2 inches, just to test it out and see if that helps you out. And if you need a little bit of help, particularly on corner exit, then try increasing the track bar some. Brake bias anywhere from 70 to 75% generally works just fine for me. This is one of those, if we go back to what we talked about in driving styles, on corner entry, if you want to try dragging the brake a little bit, then the lower the brake bias number you use, the more it will help the car to rotate, the more the car will want to turn under braking, particularly heavy braking. And then the higher number you use on the brake bias, it will have the opposite effect. It'll actually want to tighten or stabilize the car on corner entry under heavy braking. So keep those numbers in mind. Grill tape is basically an afterthought for me at this point in this game series because it doesn't really do anything to help the car as it should. So nothing to worry about there. Just make sure you don't get the car overheated. 55% shouldn't, if I remember correctly, the few times I checked it, it shouldn't have you anywhere near the critical threshold for that. Wheel lock is at 10 degrees. If you want the steering to be a little quicker for you, then increase that wheel lock to 12, maybe even try 15 or more and see if that helps you out. And then, of course, if you want the opposite effect, a little bit slower steering, then you can lower that to 9, 8, and so on and give it a try. Steering offset 0.10 works really good for me. I don't mind a little bit of a pull to the left on the straightaway. What I don't want is a pull to the right on the straightaway, and that's what can happen if you get that steering offset too high. So be careful with that, and basically just use it to adjust how much the car wants to pull to the left on the straightaway. And then fine, moving on to gear settings, a lot of different options here. I was able to go fast using like a 3.0, 3.1 rear end ratio, and then you can see I settled on about a 3.25 just to get the RPMs up a little bit more and help a little bit from the exit on the corners where the engine can lug a little bit if you get the RPMs too low. But again, plenty of adjustability there. And of course, if you get too high with the rear end ratio, that will affect the amount of grill tape you can run because it'll make the engine run hotter with the additional RPMs. You can also use the rear end ratio if you want. It's not my preferred method, but if you want, you can use it as a setup tool as well. And if you lower the rear end ratio, that will actually tighten up the car. And if you raise the rear end ratio, that will actually loosen the car. The additional RPMs will generally help the car to turn a little bit more, particularly on corner exit. So that'll do it for Pocono. Thank you very much for joining me, and stay tuned as we will continue our support for NASCAR Heat 3.